I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. This is the first subcommittee regulation, zoning regulation review subcommittee meeting. My name is Rob Labrandi. I'm the town planner for the town of Trumbull. As you know, you have been selected from your various commissions, Economic Development, Planning and Zoning Board of Appeals, because you all have an effect or deal with the effects of the zoning regulations. So you all play an integral part in this process. This is going to be a full regulation overhaul and review. So we're going to go, I'm going to refer back to Don if we're going to go line by line and really dive into this. But what I want to do first is just go around the table briefly, just tell everybody who you are, what commission you're in, I guess how many years you've been on the commission, and then we can move forward. We have our consultant here who we've hired, Don Poland from Goldman in New York and Steve Kushner from Goldman in New York. They've been great so far working with us. We are on track. Mostly, as of right now. So this is the first of hopefully 3 subcommittee meetings. So we're going to
4.
Yeah,
first of 4.
First of 4. I'm sorry.
More to go.
Yeah, 3 more to go. So we're, if you can actually come to all these meetings, great. I know everybody has a busy schedule, so we're going to try and be as thorough as possible in a timely manner. So, let's stay with what we're reviewing on task, and I think we should move forward fairly quickly. Again, I'm Rob Labrandi, I'm the town planner at Trumbull.
My name's Carl Scarpelli, Zoning Board of Appeals Chairman for 20 years.
Wow.
Bill Maher, Engineering. Doug Williams, Zoning Enforcement.
I'm David Prush. I'm Chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission currently, and 4 years on P&Z and 3 years on the CBA before that.
Steve Kushner, Goldman in New York.
Donald Poland, Goldman in New York.
Ralph Sather, Economic and Community Development Commission Chairman. Been on the commission for 8 years.
Chris Lorem, also on the Economic and Community Development Commission for just over a year.
Chris, I'm sorry, your last name again?
Lorem, L-O-O-R-A-M.
You make mine easy.
Thank you.
Dennis Miko. ZBA, probably 8 years, I think, or something like that.
Okay.
Mars Conti, Planning and Zoning.
Oh, okay. So I'm just gonna pass it to Don, and we're just gonna start.
Well, we made it through our first 2 items already, which were introduction of Steve and I and names around the table. So we're off to a good start here. Thanks for the introduction, Rob. I want to provide a little background on kind of what we as the consultants have done so far to start. That'll lead us into the draft chapters that are before you guys tonight. I'll talk a little bit about the process, and then I'll discuss what we'll be going through tonight. So we started off with essentially a review of the regulations. Steve and I looked at them from the perspective of kind of like what's missing, provisions that we typically see within community zoning regulations that aren't present in yours, and also kind of what's redundant within your regs. And for example, I believe there was 20 some odd or 30 some odd words in your definitions section that didn't even appear in your zoning regulations, and those just went away. So you guys haven't even, you don't have to worry about those. They're just essentially gone. We issued a memo that said what they were, and then they went away because they're not there in the regs. So that was essentially the first step of review. We then went through and did a reorganization, as we had said in our initial proposal and early meeting with the community, that we would try and reorganize the regulations into a more meaningful and user-friendly format. And you'll start seeing that tonight in chapters 1, 2, and 3. After that, we got into a process of, we did a number of focus groups, and they're all blurring together in my mind right now, but we met with engineers and architects who use your regulations regularly to discuss with them where they may encounter problems, have issues, or what have you. They typically are very good at providing feedback just due to the amount of usage they have with the regs. We also met with commercial property owners to discuss maybe challenges they had, barriers they had encountered, and so forth. In general, I'll be honest, through the focus group process, we did not get significant negative feedback. Most of the comments, most of the input was fairly straightforward, fairly simple, not very critical, and so forth. We then hosted an open house that was open to the public, where people could come in, spend time with me, and discuss the regs. And there was, I believe, 3 individuals that participated in that process, and also provided very good and helpful input. Maybe a little more critical in some aspects, but nothing beyond what we expected to anticipate. We then essentially started with the first 3 chapters, and we've kind of broken up the regs in these meetings into 3 chapters per meeting, give or take. I think there's one meeting that's just going to be 2 chapters. And so what was sent to you already, what you should have received about a week ago, was chapters 1, 2, and 3. That's the introduction, the interpretation section, and the general regulation section. And we'll discuss that more once I turn it over kind of to an open discussion. The draft chapters, from what comes out of tonight, any feedback and input you get us from a process standpoint, we will incorporate into these 3 chapters. But these 3 chapters will be placed aside at that point. We'll move on to chapters 4 and 5, I think, for the next meeting, which will be your residential and commercial zoning districts. Then chapter 6, which is going to be your site development standards, along with 7, which I think is the general regulations, and 8 in those will be clustered together. And then 8 and 9, which gets into the administrative regulations, will be at a later meeting. We'll go through each set of chapters, incorporate, put them behind, and then we will pull together a full second draft. I did issue a memo with this draft that kind of said how we showed things in here. Stuff in red is new additions. Stuff in yellow is either something I want to talk about with you guys tonight, or it's just an editorial note to myself not to forget about it. And I'll explain those as we go through them. And things that are strike through, I'm recommending for deletion. Anything that was redundant, non-regulatory, like the 20 some odd words that are in the definitions today that don't actually exist within the regulations, they just go away without the strike through, because they have no effect on the regulations themselves. So we just try and eliminate out redundancies as we make our way through. I also want to make clear, don't get bogged down in numbering, outline, and stuff like that at this point. I keep the numbering very basic. I keep the outline very basic, because it's all subject to change as we move through this. When we get to a final draft for adoption, we'll go through and make sure that's all tightened up and solid and that everything's right. Same with, you're gonna see, and I highlighted some of them, where there's references to Article 7, section whatever. I know that's gonna change at some point in time, so for now I just highlighted in yellow, so that when we get to the final numbering scheme, we can go through and make those edits and corrections along the way, or for the final document. So with that said, I'll pause for a minute, ask you guys if you have any questions about the process or anything I introduced at this point, and then we can move on to the regs. So, no? Okay. One last introductory comment. You guys know your regs 1,000 times better than we ever can. We know zoning. We have a tremendous background in how communities go about it, but the ins and outs of the provisions of your regulations, you're gonna know far better than we do. We try to get up to speed, but this is where both of us, we really rely on you guys. As we go through here, if there's stuff you think's an issue we didn't address, or if we're making a change or modification that you have an issue with, speak up, let us know. At the end of the day, they're your regs. Planning and Zoning Commission is going to have to be comfortable with them in order to adopt them. And that's what this committee is here to work through, so that we get to a final draft set of regulations that can get adopted. I mean, that's the true outcome. The one last thing I'll just add is through the reorganization process, and you don't see it yet in these first 3 chapters, we convert to a table and diagram format. We use as many tables and as many visual diagrams as possible to reduce the overall size of the regs to make things more concise. And my hope is that through this process that we cut out at least 100 pages from these very large, at times unruly regulations. So that's our goal. So with that, you guys now have before you chapters 1 through 2 and 3. I would like to just run through chapter 1, sorry, very quickly, and just kind of say to you what we did, and then we can run back through it where you guys can comment and critique and provide input if that works for you. Your preamble has basically stayed the same, and therefore, being a preamble, we left it at the front. We then felt that your regs were missing an authority and purpose section, which most zoning regs actually have. So we clearly stated that the authority comes from Chapter 124 of the General Statutes, and then the purpose basically provides a bulleted, highlighted version, or bulleted version of Section 8-22 of Chapter 124, stating what are the purposes of zoning in the state of Connecticut, and ultimately the purposes of zoning as adopted in your community. Some communities do tweak this language a little bit. They feel that the statutory language doesn't perfectly represent their community. While I tend to favor the statutory language, I am open to, if you feel that, you know, there's some other wording or other things you have to emphasize in here, we're open to considering them. We then added a applicability section.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
You want us to?
I'm gonna come back
All right,
and
okay.
we'll go through. I just want
All right, good
to
enough.
give the overview.
Got it.
So then we add an applicability section which provides conformities of buildings and land, kind of stating how the regulations apply to all properties within the town, and make it clear that approvals are required for persons to proceed with any development or changes in their land. Section 103, class of zones. This has mostly stayed the same. As you'll see, I highlighted the revised August 1991 date. I'm assuming, your map's probably been revised since then, so that date is inaccurate. And chances are there may be some revisions to your map that come out of this process. So when we get to the end, we will get an accurate and proper date in place. Zoning regulations as we see them, or zoning districts as we see them at this point, we don't see any changes to the actual residential districts in the context of how they're named or organized. Same with your special overlay districts. We do believe we're working towards a new commercial district specifically for the mall, recognizing it doesn't fit very well in the BC zone and the intent of that zone, so we'll probably break it out into its own zoning designation. So I just put a placeholder in there for that, saying, okay, something over here with the mall. And most likely, from our preliminary review and input we've received from the community, gonna try and consolidate the 3 industrial zones into 1 industrial zone. So noted there, we'll see how we end up as we move through this process. You have an extensive section here on uses prohibited in all zones, and some communities feel very strongly about prohibitions. At the end of the day, zoning is actually a permissive process, not a prohibitive process. Therefore, that which is not expressly permitted within the regs is automatically prohibited. So I kind of feel there's not a need for a prohibition section. That being said, I also know that communities can be very tied to a prohibition section, so I didn't just jump in and delete it or recommend deletion. I figured we could have a discussion about it. And there are some sections in here, 13 and 14, where you see the strike-throughs. Your performance standards already handle what's being stated in 13. So my recommendation, if you do keep this section in full, we can get rid of that. The livestock farming provision is really a regulatory provision for engaging in such activities. So that, as the note says there, I've moved to the accessory use section within the residential zone, so it can at least leave here because it just doesn't feel to be in the proper place. Same with 15 on chicken coops. And that basically is the overview of what we've done with chapter 1 so far. I'd now like to go back to the first page and have you guys, if you have comments, critiques, questions, kind of direct me through this chapter and what your thoughts were.
The point I was
Since I can look over your shoulder,
Yeah.
I see you have some.
Well, I just want to, there are terms in here that are subject to interpretation, like
Okay.
overcrowding of land. That might mean something to me and something different to my neighbor.
Yeah,
Concentration of population, that's in the preamble. In the purposes, again, concentration of population. How do we need to be more specific? Or
Okay.
can we be? I mean, maybe not. I
Sure.
mean, to me, it's a general directional term, or they are,
yeah.
but it could mean different things to different people.
So this language, just so you know, goes back to the 1920s. It comes from what was called the Standard State Zoning Enabling Act, and it's when the Department of Commerce for the federal government authorized states to adopt zoning. States then adopted zoning based on that. So this language appears, 1, in the 1920s from the federal government, and then 2, in the state statutes when states adopted. It's carryover language. It was intended at the time to, I believe it was intended to be general, like overcrowding of land, undue concentrations, kind of subjective. Each community could make their determination as to what that was. I also recognize that some of this language is dated in the sense of, if you read some of the secure from, it says to secure safety from fire, panic, flood, and other dangers. How many of us live in fear of fire, panic, and flood today? Whereas the conditions of cities in the 1920s were much different. We can tweak it if you feel there's more direct language that would apply better to
Well, yeah,
Trumbull.
I don't,
So,
I'm not involved with these on a day-to-day basis like, for example, Rob is, but I thought one of our objectives was to make it easier to implement. And my question is, do we need to somehow better define or explain those words to make Rob and others' job easier to manage these regulations?
Yep.
That's all.
So I just have I don't want to say a fear, but, conserving the value of buildings and property, that we hear that, that addressed all the time, you're gonna lower my property values if you build this.
yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out how can we put these in place without the fear of an appeal or something based off of these.
Okay.
Is there backup for this? Can the town defend against something like this? But some of these are pretty straightforward. Protecting historical factors, protecting agricultural uses. If somebody's coming in for a subdivision that, it's a farm, they want to build a subdivision. Are these appealable or no? Because these are
Well, I
these
think
are just general standard. Are these the guiding like, what's the
They're-
premise behind this?
They're general guidance to the community, and as I said, I think they're intentionally subjective. That you guys get to kind of decide, you know, to what extent. Your comment on conserving value of property, I'm not a lawyer, and this is always where I walk this fine ground with your town attorney was already here, but I think Connecticut has been pretty clear through its courts that it's never ruled that a zone change is actually, you know, harmful to property values and therefore overturned it. There are other states where the courts have ruled differently, and communities have to demonstrate that a change of zone will not negatively impact properties. That's not necessarily the case in Connecticut, so I don't see the language opening you up
Okay.
for an issue here. And Steve, feel free
Well,
to jump
just
in.
a thought, maybe we could preserve a lot of this language, but as an introductory statement, indicate that it's the goal of these regulations to promote these attributes, but not a guarantee. set
Yeah,
forth
because
in the regulations.
you have the guide of the plan of conservation and development as the last point. You know, I think something, yeah, some type of, I don't want to say disclaimer, but something in the front to kind of state that these are the paths to positive development within the municipality. So. What do you think, Rob?
Yep. Just anything that makes it easier for you to administer this.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's really just, it's the stated goal of the town and the commission and boards to promote these attributes as opposed to a guarantee. So that maybe makes it less likely someone could challenge the commissions if they feel like they've been injured, you know, by a decision or something like that.
Thank you, Steve. Next, anyone? Basically open up the whole chapter and say we don't necessarily have to go page by page. If someone has another issue, feel free to just raise it.
Well, I'll speak about 1-04.
Okay.
And I think you brought up the fact that I think it's a good idea. We've adopted the position in our office that if the regs are silent, it's not prohibited. That's essentially what you're saying here. So do we want to add that? Or do we want to just accept the practice that we've been adhering to?
Yeah, that's why. So do we? Yeah, because I was thinking, I was kind of in a quandary because do we allow, well, at least the applicant to come in front of planning zoning with a special permit if the use isn't shown, or do we just
So
stop it?
this kind of gets us ahead, but we won't go there. Just so you know, in the first section of Chapter 2, interpretation, there is now going to be language prohibited is not permitted.
Okay.
So then two things are going to occur with this. One, you can decide if you're comfortable with that and we can get rid of 1.04, or if you really feel strongly about some of those uses in 1.04, they're so awful you want to be clear they are prohibited, we can keep them. When we get to, and this is where I kind of say we go through, we make these revisions, and then we'll get you back a second draft. When we get to Chapter 4, residential, and Chapter 5, where we're dealing with the permitted uses, my recommendation, if it's not already there, and I just can't remember at this point, would be that we add language that states that similar uses to those identified in the table can be determined as permissible by the commission. So that, just as we know, uses constantly, you know, we don't have antennas anymore in, TV antennas on houses. So regs used to have TV antennas as accessory uses, and they've kind of gone away. But now we have satellite dishes on houses. Your regs, that change may occur along the way, and your regs haven't accounted for it as of yet. Someone comes in for a satellite dish, you don't have a provision that specifically addresses satellite dishes. The Planning and Zoning Commission can say, well, wait a second, that's really no different than a television antenna, which we already have provisions in place for. So we'll accept it as a permitted accessory use because we recognize it's similar. Whereas if someone came in to then, put some, I don't know, newfangled technology that we've never heard of, we have no idea of, can't even conceptualize it today, but it just seems so out there. It's not related to a TV antenna on a house. The commission can make the determination, no, it's not similar in nature, and therefore it's prohibited.
So they're gonna have to go in front of the commission to get a decision.
So that then gets to the administrative section. How much authority does the commission want to give to staff? One, explicitly, and then two, just kind of sometimes it's the relationship between staff and commission. When I was in East Windsor, my commission gave me a lot of latitude to make decisions. And basically in that situation, similar use, I could tell someone it's not similar. If they did agree with me and felt it truly was similar, then I would say, fine, go to the commission. Or vice versa, that could play out the other way, where I thought it was similar and for whatever reason they didn't feel comfortable with it being similar and wanted it explicit, then apply for a text amendment. But we can address that kind of with the authorities to staff in the administrative section.
Okay.
But I also, the reason for that kind of similar use, and I can't remember if Avon's regs had it, but at the end of the day, so many commissions try to regulate every single feasible use they can think of, and you come across regs that will have tables. I think the city of Hartford has tables that go on for 19 pages. They've listed out kind of every single use in the world. And the fact is, you really don't have to, Uses are in some ways very general. Retail is retail. Commercial office is commercial office. Residential single family is residential single family, and so isn't, multifamily and so forth. Most uses group together very easily. So we can provide, and we hope to provide through the process, concise use tables with grouped uses based on, residential, commercial, industrial, possibly mixed use. And then the interpretation as to expressly permitted and prohibited based on similarity becomes an interpretation at the staff level and the commission level. So.
Just to add to that, skipping ahead to special permits and special exceptions. In fact, in Avon, the regulations are set up so the commission really gets to determine that a use that's proposed, which is similar to those special exception uses that are listed and defined, the commission can make that determination that it's similar enough, and then process that request as a special permit, even though the exact wording of the use isn't actually enumerated in the regulations.
So they have to state that at the meeting? Prior, they have to vote to say that the use was similar enough?
So the way it worked in Avon, again, at the staff level, someone would come in and propose a use, and at the staff level, we would sort of hazard a guess as to whether or not maybe it might be similar enough to those uses that were listed, and if so, give that applicant an opportunity to apply to the commission. The commission always reserved the right to say, no, it's not similar enough, and of course, then they also had the authority under their special exception authority to vote yes or no on the actual project.
So they would move forward on the, say, site plan or a special permit
Right.
for that use, and then, okay.
Right. I was gonna have one more thing, and maybe in favor of not listing the prohibited uses, to your point, is you may not be able to think of every undesirable prohibited use done, right?
Yep.
And you sort of, could run into a problem where somebody could throw that in the town's face and say, well, it's not on the prohibited list, and even though the regulations are generally written in a permissive fashion, why didn't you guys think of this as a prohibited use? You listed slaughterhouses, but you didn't list, my use, so.
tanneries, you know, or whatever.
Asphalt plants. Or
Right. In East Windsor, we kind of just, with the determination of similar uses, if an application was coming in for, I don't know, it was an automotive use but didn't fit well with repair, didn't fit well with dealership, it was some type of hybrid and it needed a similar use determination, we would just at the beginning, once the application was opened, whether it was site plan or special permit, we would just, as staff, instruct the commission, you know, first thing at hand here, you have to make a determination of similarity of use. And they typically did it by consensus. If they couldn't just get a consensus nod and members were really in opposition, then maybe the chair would call for a vote and just say, you know, we have to put this to a vote to determine, you know, whether it is. I can be honest, it never went to a vote. The commission was usually just kind of like, yeah, it's similar. Because I think at the end of the day, those things end up pretty obvious, you know.
Yeah.
A lot of these items come to the ZBA when Doug catches them, like cars, multiple cars on a lot. A lot of these things just come to ZBA. And then people try to say, well, I have 5 cars.
Right.
Or I want storage on my thing, and I have lean-tos and everything else, so.
Right.
Let me ask a question
Sure.
back on 1.03, mixed use,
Yep.
which is something I know our commission is interested in
Yep.
and supportive of, done properly. It's listed, I think, here under commercial zones, and it says BC Long Hill Green. It, to me, sounds awfully limiting. There may be more mixed use Long Hill Greens around town
Yep.
in a few years. My suggestion, or at least for discussion, is should we call out mixed use as a separate class, or at least give it more prominence than just Long Hill Green in the mall?
Right. And I think we will do that as we go through this. There's been numerous times where mixed use has come up. For now, I was just kind of, we recognize that it's there with Long Hill. We recognize we're probably gonna do something more towards mixed use around the mall. But the fact is, and this goes back to the initial tour you gave us, and actually 2 of you gave us in discussions we had, related to, there's a lot of these kind of overlay or special zones that have creeped in recent years, and that's common in all communities, don't take that as a negative. But is there a way to kind of maybe consolidate some of this stuff where you have one kind of flexible zoning designation that can be applied for in places, and it would allow for things like mixed use to occur? And I'm just not sure yet. You know, we're gonna dive in after tonight's meeting, we're gonna dive into the residential and commercial zones, and we'll really get a feel for what's going on there and how we might be
Okay,
able
I
to
just,
address it.
as a vote of 1, I don't want mixed use to be limited to Long Hill Green or the mall.
So,
I think.
And so my answer, the short answer is I think we're gonna explore that as we
Okay,
go through.
good enough.
So I've got to pull you guys back to the prohibited use section, 1.04. What are your thoughts? Can we do away with it, or?
So if it's not listed and we don't think it should be prohibited, what happens then? You know, if we see, if there's something that, you know, may be offensive to some degree or another, you know, like I said, like an asphalt plant or something like that.
Yeah.
Do we just make them go through the proper steps, you know?
Well, my general feeling is if we go to how your industrial regulations are written right now and the uses that are permitted in them, assuming no changes move forward whatsoever, there is nothing even close or conceivable to an asphalt plant in them. Therefore, not expressly permitted, it is prohibited. It seems pretty straightforward. And
So if it's not there, you can't have it.
you can't have it. If they can make an argument that's similar to an existing use, then fine, fair enough. You know, let them go to the commission, let the commission make that determination. one of the main things here, especially when you look at these, is, you know, some of them I'm gonna poke fun, you know. Sewage disposal plants, except where controlled by the town. Who's gonna open a sewage disposal plant that's not the town? You know, so some of them in my mind are very fun and interesting. Number two is, you know, we still refer to industrial zones, but look closely at your industrial zones and what it allows and what it focuses on. They're really not industrial. A lot of this stuff, I think, stems back to a point in time when your zoning regs were adopted, and you know, industrial zones back then were something different. That, you know, proximate cities like Bridgeport or whatever had some really noxious industrial uses, and therefore you guys were scared of those and you wanted to make it clear you don't want them here. Those things have changed today. Your industrial parks are office parks, and if they're doing anything, you know, that's less office-like and more industrial-like, then most likely it's laboratory and research and so forth. So I'm just not sure you open yourself up to a lot by getting rid of these. And if, so long as we make it clear, I look at one that then becomes more similar. You know, you have used car lots in here, so the regs say you don't want used car dealerships. I get that, if that's the feel of the community. We can be very clear in the permitted uses that it's new car dealers, you know.
Or, I was thinking to Avon's regulations again, in the permitted use section, you talk about new car dealerships, you could say used cars are allowed as an accessory use to the principal use being new car sales, but not as a separate standalone use. So that's a kind of another way to get at the fact that independent used car lots are not allowed in town. Used car sales are only allowed, you know, as an accessory use to a principal use, which would be new car sales. Now, again, to Don's point about the world is changing, and you know, now we have something called, not to get too far afield here, but now we have something called certified pre-owned cars that we never had 20 or 30 years ago. So that presents another challenge when we get to that section. How do you deal with that? In Avon, we had the guy that had the BMW franchise in Hartford wanted to open up a satellite store in Avon, but he was prohibited from selling brand new cars in Avon due to his franchise agreement. So he wanted to build a beautiful showroom, but he wanted to principally sell certified pre-owned cars.
So in that instance, do you have to work off of a percentage, like so many cars have to be new?
So the commission actually ended up modifying the regulations to what they thought to bring them up to more of a modern day standard to permit by special exception both new car sales and certified pre-owned sales as a principal use, and then again the sort of traditional old school used cars would be accessory to that. But my point in telling that whole story is there are other ways to get at prohibiting used car lots without listing it in a prohibited use section.
Doug, how do you feel about this?
Well, you know, I was just thinking, there's no harm in leaving these things here, as long as we understand that what you and I have talked about repeatedly, and that is that other uses are, if the regs are silent, they're not permitted. I don't think there's a reason that we can't leave them here, but with the understanding that the regs should, you know.
Maybe we could go through. Maybe we could go through what we want to cut out, like the sewage disposal plant.
Yeah.
At least trim some of the sewage off.
The correctional institutions.
So let's leave it that way. Let's leave it that way.
It wouldn't be so quick to take out
Yeah.
the sewage disposal plant, because you get somebody with a big development and want to do a sewage plant to support that. You're laughing at something that's very possible.
But
Well-
I would then argue that is accessory to the proposed development. It's part of it, which I think puts it in maybe a different category.
Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
just taking that out,
Yeah.
I mean,
Well-
it sounds like it's something that you,
I would agree with that 50 years ago, but with the town mostly sewered, with public sewers, you could not, well, I don't know, with an area in town where you would have a large development where you wouldn't be access to public sewer. So I think the health regulations would push you into tying into public sewer where you couldn't put a, 50 years ago, your point's valid, because people could have said, in the white, at the end of the farm road, we're gonna put a 2,500, unit development and put our sewage disposal on site.
Case in point, I mean, over in South Nichols, the town has a 60-acre piece of land.
Right.
Now, that is not sewered over there. The town could decide next year that they want to sell that
Yeah,
to a developer.
but that's the one, but,
I mean,
Yep.
I'm just thinking
Right, I
outside
know,
the
I know.
box.
So I'll yield to you guys keeping these if you so wish. Just want to
Well,
remind you as we go through.
the only comment I make on used car lots, it's in there saying you can't have it, because, someone will come in town and they'll take an example on Main Street, there's a large auto repair place there, and there's a number of cars parked. Now, are those cars for sale or not for sale? They're not supposed to be for sale, they're supposed to be just, but someone will come in, well, if it doesn't say I can't have a used car lot, that looks like a used car lot to me, why can't I put in what he has?
Right.
And then you get to the point, well, that's not a used car lot, those are cars that are being repaired, but they've been there for a number of years, and who knows, they're not for sale. Somebody walks in, is that car for sale? Yeah, but it's not an advertised used car lot. So, like I said, someone will come in, well, it doesn't say I can't put a used car lot in. So when you have it here, no used car lots, they can't come in and say, well, I can't have a car lot. Because it says no car lot.
Understood. I can't argue you on
But someone
that.
will always, oh, it's not on your list, so I can maybe have it.
Just remember, my job here as your consultant is
Yep.
to push you, challenge you, and ultimately try and reduce your regs so that they are more simplified and to the point.
Even number 8, penal and correction institutes.
If the state
Yeah.
wants to do it, they're gonna trump you on zoning.
Well,
But
I
there is a
understand.
movement towards private facilities
Well,
now,
but
so I get it.
private, and also being in here says it's not permitted, that's a rallying point for
Yep.
residents to say, well, look, it says they can't have it, even though the state says, well, we don't go by that anyway. But it'll motivate people to, to make an attempt not to have it.
So it doesn't hurt to leave them in.
Well, it
Right.
probably doesn't. I don't think, because it doesn't really take up a lot of space. I think if you take about 13 and 14, it's only, one page.
Yeah.
Just like I said, somebody will come in and say, oh, well, it doesn't say I can't have a car lot, but you say I can't, but whatever.
And we hear a lot of it in ZBA.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, number 13 is covered by your performance standards, which will be in your commercial zone regulations. So I'm comfortable with removing it from here. It's really just redundant. The farm one goes to the accessory uses in residential, so because that's more of a regulatory provision than a prohibition. You're basically saying they're prohibited unless you meet these standards, but you should really say it permissively in the residential section that, under these circumstances, under these standards, they are permitted. So that will move there, in the same with 15. So. Cool.
Is there anything we should, I hate to say it, add in? Because, I don't know, from my experience in other municipalities, they're more urban here, but I keep seeing a gradual flow of urban uses coming to more suburban areas.
That's a good point, because
Can you-
what the most
Well,
people
I hate to
try
say it, but
Yeah.
we've had issues in the past, again, in urban areas with hookah lounges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hate to say it too, but again,
I just saw
Asphalt
hookahs
one.
as a prohibition in a regulation today.
Oh, really?
For the first time, I had never seen it show up in the reg, and I saw a community with it as a prohibition.
Well,
So
I think that
it's
would
funny
go to,
you see
that would
that.
go to speak to the silence of the regs, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if not
Yeah.
expressly permitted,
yeah, and it's
it
not
is
similar to any
prohibited.
other use. Like, do we allow clubs in town, but there's no other use besides it for a restaurant, But I guess for commercial, we're kind of
Well,
getting into a gray area.
So once again, in that sense, when we get to the commercial regs, I would like us to take a very close look at alcohol-related uses and licensing, because you've got very good state standards through the state licensing process. And while they have all these different categories and so forth, I think the way most communities have gone today is just only allowing and I believe the specific license is full service restaurant. That means you have to provide tableside service of on-site warm cooked food at any time alcohol is being served. So you can't just run a bar, or you can't just run a club. You have to provide the full services that go with it. So I'd like to address it more so there than listing out these aren't. And remember, as I'm gonna force you to move to Article 2 next, the first thing we have there now is language that clearly states that which is not permitted is prohibited. So you've got fallback beyond section 1.04.
So you don't see a potential conflict in the two statements. One is if it's not expressly permitted, it's prohibited.
Yep.
But then here are things that are prohibited.
No, I don't see conflict.
To me, it's one or the other.
For me, I'd love it to be one or the other, but I don't see a conflict if they both exist.
So what if it said, included but not limited to, or something? I don't want somebody to come back and say, because I'm not on this list of prohibited, I'm therefore permitted.
We can look at the lead-in language to the prohibited, and we could add something to the extent, sorry, let me just get back there.
In the business of, it's one or the other, zoning really is not, to your point, it's really number one. Zoning is, you can't do it unless it says in the regulations you can do it. That's the whole basis of zoning. There's really nothing in any enabling statute that talks about listing for.
So these are kind of for instances as opposed to the total list. I'm trying to make it easy.
It's a way for a community to sort of highlight,
right.
Even though we're telling you that you can't do a use, conduct a use unless we tell you you can do it. We're sort of adding extra emphasis to the ones that we're sort of stating up front.
As long as that's understood, it makes it easy to implement.
So that's why I could add a line to that lead-in paragraph that says, and I've done this in other communities, that just says, these are uses that the community has determined, that they have, concerns over or want to make clear they are expressly prohibited, but any other use may be prohibited per section, the lead into Article 2, whatever that section number is. We can clarify that.
I'm trying to make this easy for you. I don't want a gray area here where people are.
Yeah, I think that gives staff the authority to, if one of these do come up, we say, listen, no, you can't do it. Where, hey, listen, you could go in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission, but it's going to be a very hard sell, and they're going to look at the regulations the same as I'm going to look at, and these aren't going to really be a similar use. I don't know, Dave or
I was
or
going to say,
Doug.
listen, it's not uncommon for that sort of question to come into our office, and either Rob or myself will field that question. And it's fairly, I don't want to say easy is the wrong term, but it's a fairly straightforward answer. It's not in here, so we don't allow it. It's just really simply put. I can't express it any further to you, Mr. Applicant, or whatever you want to call it. So it hasn't been a problem yet.
All right. Good enough.
I made myself a note to put some language in.
Okay.
If everyone's good with Article 1, I'd love to move on to 2. So in 2, your regulations, your interpretive regulations, which is essentially your definitions section, clearly laid out the definitions of things you wanted to define. And as we said, there were many that didn't appear in the regs, so they went away. What your interpretation section, from our perspective, was missing is those general interpretations. So the new section 2.00 at the start is general interpretations, prohibited if not permitted, minimum or maximum standards, and when conflicts exist with other regulatory provisions. And then section 2.01, interpretation of specific terms, things like shall, may, zone, district, and so forth. And then interpretations of other terms. You can always come into a situation where how a certain provision is written, there are words within sentences that have general use, and all of a sudden we end up in a debate over what it means, and therefore we say first and foremost, if Connecticut state statute defines it, we go with that definition. If not, Black's Law Dictionary is next, and if not that, if we can't find it there, we go to Merriam-Webster's. These are standard sets of ways of defining things, and we can trust them if we get there. That's then followed by all of your definitions. So before we start, since the definitions are so long, any questions, concerns, issues with 2.00, 2.01, or 2.02?
Do we need to put something that says the latest version of?
Yeah.
Interesting, yeah.
And I've yes.
Because I got a Webster holding up my computer monitor in my office.
Yeah.
I don't think
Let
it should be
me-
used.
Do they still publish dictionaries? Do they still have those?
I don't know. I'll sell it.
We can do, on Connecticut state statute, we can do as amended.
Yeah.
That's easy enough. Black's Law and Merriam, let's look at a way to do it. Merriam always gets me nowadays with, I don't own the Merriam-Webster's dictionary anymore. I just go to their online site, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to necessarily cite to that. So let
Yeah,
me,
that's what I was thinking.
let me look into version dates here. Thank you. So, when we go through definitions, I try, in general, just so you know, whether I say I or we, it's always the both of us. But in general, I try to do as little harm as possible. When you've had definitions in place for a long time that you've been using, I personally don't like to change them unless there's a problem with them. So this is where I kind of rely on staff and commission members to kind of say, we've had an issue with this definition and it needs to be addressed. Otherwise, I kind of take the perspective of, this is your definition, this is how you've been interpreting it. I really don't want to tinker it. So we made very little changes, if any at all, other than removing redundancy from here. But it's at the bottom of page 4, and it's the definition of daycare centers that then comes up with other types of daycare related as regulated by state law. I really have to ask staff and commission members and anyone else who knows, what is this provision that exists in the middle of your definition that I've highlighted in yellow and put strike through? It's quite evident, to me at least, I think something arose at some point in time that the community felt this needed to be here. But in the last sentence of this paragraph on daycare, you say, quote, daycare centers includes child daycare centers as defined by section yada yada general statutes. My feeling here is just simply change the name to child daycare center so that it is the state definition, and allow the state definition to drive the interpretation here rather than this very convoluted thing. But the reason why I didn't just hit delete, and I'm showing it to you and I'm asking, is I don't know the history behind this, and someone may be very wedded to it. So if anyone has insights, thoughts, I'd love to know.
I don't think, to use your term, I don't think we're wedded to it. The only thing that I agree, Don, that the children should be the primary driver here. The adult daycare centers that we've seen a couple of coming for us now, right, with the most recent one was from that builder that came in. We haven't heard anything more about it.
Oh,
But.
is that more of a boarding house?
More
or
of a
was it-
boarding house for adults. Not a boarding house, but it seemed like the people that needed supervision, assisted living sort of things, but in a residential area.
Okay.
Now, that's regulated more by the state,
Okay.
That's
rather
it.
than our regs, and that regulation by the state would, I believe, trump our regulations anyway.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna bring up, that thing about more than 12 children. Depends on how many staff they have. We had one,
Well, then we have the one on Main Street, right?
yeah, that they wanted to put a lot more people in. The state said, yes, you have enough people working there to handle that amount of children. And then we had people come and complain that there were too many kids there. But it wasn't up to us, it was up to the state. They handled the daycare center.
Yeah. Well, that got into a whole other thing, because that was an intensification of use issue that we ended up going over, and that becomes a whole nother thing. And you're right on that was the premise of that whole CBA application, but it ended up, that's all understood.
Do you think we should look at section 19A 77 of the county
Yeah,
general statutes? to
maybe
see-
it's not a bad idea, Rob, you and I will just look at that tomorrow and get back to Don in terms of how that applies.
Is that-
But I
has-
agree with you on the child, on limiting it to the children.
Right.
Yeah, I'm wondering
Using
if-
the state definition, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to explore the need for a definition for adult daycare centers? And is that something we should take up as consideration in permitted uses?
I think we should talk about that, because I think, and I'm not well versed on it, but I think it's governed by the state, and I think even if we put it in here, it might not be.
Okay.
Yeah, are these allowable in all zones? Can we differ?
We don't differentiate
Yeah,
that with the daycare.
that's right, these could go into a residential zone as well as a commercial zone, right?
Well, child daycare
Well, child
centers,
daycare,
that first
limited to
one.
6 in residential, I beg your
Right,
pardon on
the
that.
child daycare center is the commercial daycare
Right.
center.
Okay.
And we can very clearly limit that to a commercial zone. It's the family
Family
daycare
which is limited to 6.
home or group daycare home that has can't be treated differently than a single-family residence, provided it does not have more than 6 students or 6 children.
So the
Six
first-
children.
Because it's outlined in family daycare home, that's where you'll see where it sticks to 6 that I just.
Right, so,
The first sentence here that you got crossed out, I'm thinking that in Trumbull, when they upgraded the school systems, they put a Trumbull Love Children Daycare Center there. So maybe this is put in there saying this does not, we're administered by a public school, so this doesn't affect them.
okay.
That could be where that came from, because
Okay.
Trumbull Love TLC came about a number of years back,
I
maybe
was-
20 years ago.
I did it.
You did it, okay, so that could be where the language arose.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that, because we were putting it in all the elementary schools.
Right.
And by the time I got it in there, my daughter was in middle school.
Are they still there? Are they still there?
Yes.
They are.
Yes. And they're very well used.
That's
Right.
right.
They're very, yeah.
So, well, why don't you check that statutory reference? My general feeling at that point, though, I think there is a reasonableness to interpret child daycare facility as accessory to a school. And I still question whether or not this language needs to persist here, because in the context of use, we're really talking about commercial daycare centers, the family daycare centers, and
And
so
they're
forth.
already in the schools, they're not going any farther.
Right, right. So,
The same might be true if there was an employer in town that offered daycare. Do you have any
In the
employers
business.
that offer daycare? That could also be very easily treated as an accessory use.
right.
Yeah. I don't know if they have that in the town. Where in the business,
Yeah,
The
yeah,
offices,
have
they have
got a
daycare for
large
the kids.
employer, right.
which isn't a bad idea.
Yeah.
Could the state mandate that we have family daycare home?
The state just makes it clear that through zoning, you can't treat it any differently than a single-family home. So therefore, if a person wants to do family daycare in their house and they meet the state regulations, they can do it. You can't stop them. so,
Do we have anything for, oh, we do, group daycare home, okay,
yeah.
we'll get there.
Yeah, and it's basically, it's the same with all three of these, the daycare center, the group, and the family. You have the same language sandwiched in the middle of it in the reference to the statutory definition, you know.
Are we going through definite, like, can we,
Yeah.
can I say a definition?
Sure.
Brewery.
Ah,
That does it.
And I was doing this around lunch, food truck.
Yeah,
I don't know if we wanna still put that under, it's not in there.
Food trucks are defined in the ordinance, in the community code.
Oh,
And they're under they operate, if they operate at all, under the authority of the PD, police department. That's how it is.
so in terms of, we're having a quandary with, we really don't, food trucks are tough because we have our restaurants and we don't wanna put any burden on our restaurants. So I've seen some municipalities do distances where food trucks are allowed or giving a specific area. I don't know if we even wanna touch that because, they're subject to, fairs and festivals. There isn't a standard place where you can go get a food truck, I don't know if we wanna put the burden on, like I said, on the restaurants here, so I don't know. It's double-edged sword.
so, these are just some.
So I'm just throwing it out there.
Right, and these are just some thoughts on my part. Historically, this is years ago when I worked in East Hartford, we had the same kind of battle. But it was typically hot dog stands, it wasn't food trucks per se. And my general feeling has been, the hot dog vendor set up on the corner really isn't competing with the restaurants. The person stopping for a hot dog probably isn't going to stop and sit down in a restaurant and have a meal. Now, may they compete a little bit with the deli, serving sandwiches, possibly, but that competition's not a big concern. Where the food trucks have gone today, though, with the high standard and quality of food being produced in them, I'd say that competition argument can work its way in more. At the end of the day, zoning's not about regulating competition or not. But if you think it's a third rail issue in this community, you don't allow it so far, I'd say either A, stay away from it, or B, what I've seen some communities do, West Hartford just did this, they authorize food trucks in their industrial zone. So, because they don't have restaurants in their industrial zones. So.
And our regulations allow for restaurants in the industrial zone. So,
which gets back to industrial zones just aren't what they used to be, I do this slide in training sessions taken from a town who I won't name because they're actually a client of mine and I never want to, treat them poorly. But the fact is they have an industrial zone that has like 28 listed uses that are allowed, permitted, there are special permitted. Only one of them is industrial in nature. The rest are daycare centers, restaurants, retail, office. It's like, why do you even call this an industrial zone? But so, do you actually have physically existing restaurants in your industrial zones? That would be my question to you.
I think it's been more of a cafeteria.
Right.
Within the building. That's
So-
about it. But,
so
that-
there's no-
but that's what the industrial zone has been morphing because now we have the potential of a housing development
Right.
there. So I don't know if that may be the after effect of that much
So,
residential.
So once again, I'd just say maybe the industrial zones is a place to try out the food trucks because you don't have a direct competitor that's going to get up in arms if there's no actual restaurants there. Cafeteria is a little bit different. And if the food trucks are allowed at the same time restaurants are allowed, and now these zones are morphing into something else, and you have some maybe mixed-use residential. So maybe both restaurants and food trucks start to evolve in your industrial zone.
Do we permit the same way? Do we do like a special permit for the food truck then? Because
Yeah.
I've done that before where I had, it was a hot dog stand and there was no
Right.
other way I could do it. I had to do a special permit, a site plan, because they had to tell me the exact spot how many
Right.
parking spaces they were taking.
Right.
It's allow them, you know, so much signage for their little stand, and you know, I don't know.
So this.
I don't know if we're opening up the box, the Pandora's
Well,
box right now.
well,
so.
this gets to the point. One is when we get to the use regulations, we're probably going to have some heated discussions over special permitted versus as of right. I'm going to push you guys to try and consider to actually allow some things as of right, which you don't really do right now. But something like a hot dog vendor or a food truck, I would say, really? Do you really have to drag that person into a special permit process? Now, at the end of the day, you may want to. That's your decision.
Well, that's why it's like $1,000 for the permit. You know, how many hot dogs is that going to take?
And once again, that gets to the point of, then why even permit it? Why give the illusion that you're friendly to food trucks, because you're probably not?
Right now, you can't have a food truck, or you,
Right.
or no.
No.
It's regulated by the police department. I will say this to you, it's frowned upon.
But why even discuss even trying it? Because
It's
Well, I think what Rob's brought up, and I think it's a very good point, and I happen to know because we've had this conversation, I know where he's going. If you bring up two roads, like two roads, right? You bring two roads in here.
Well, but then
and-
you get into the whole thing of.
And now you have food trucks there, right? And so I know where Rob's going with this, and it's a really good question. I don't know.
But that's see, once you open that up to having a brewery, then they're gonna say, well, why can't I have a bar and have a food truck outside?
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Well, but
And
that's
the
what a
same-
brewery
That's
is,
the
but
same
that-
quandary Monroe's having right now with their brewery.
Yeah,
They're not
but-
allowing food trucks there.
But don't even, what I'm saying is, you don't even want a brewery either, or do you? Because then you get into this whole thing of food truck. You
Well,
have enough in the
I'll tell
state,
you what,
you actually have enough in the state now.
Last year, we made an after work, half an hour trip to get up to Gracious, and then they took us for a tour of it, and it's fabulous. I've
Yeah.
never been through one.
I know that, but.
so. I
It's a
think
craft brewery?
Yeah.
I think there's another way to think about this, though, especially from, I think, the economic development side, is allowing a food truck, and especially with kind of the quality of food that food vendors are doing today. It's a low-cost entry into a business, which provides opportunity for growth and expansion. And, you know, just comes to mind, there is a hot dog restaurant called Woody's in Hartford. They've been on Man vs. Food and all those different programs. People cutting through the city jump off just to go into Woody's and have a hot dog and get a picture taken. My point is, though, Woody, husband and wife, they set up a hot dog stand back in the 1980s at State House Square in downtown Hartford, and then about 15 years ago opened a storefront, and have been there ever since. So you can view it as kind of a gateway into, you know, something more substantial, that it's not just this transient thing.
Isn't that Tomlinson in Bridgeport? They used to be a little hot dog stand.
Well, yeah, that
And now
was
it's a huge building.
Well, yeah.
You know, there's Mickey's in East Hartford that started off the same way.
There's
There's
a better
many,
business in the small.
there's many of these out
And
there.
you could have the reverse condition also. You could have a successful established restaurant in town that buys a food truck because they see an opportunity, right?
You ever
So-
see that?
But also-
And then I'll just throw out two other things. With the breweries, when we define that, and it's obvious we're probably gonna have to get to that and deal within the permitted uses tables, you then have kind of, is it just a brewery, the production use, or are you allowing breweries with tasting rooms? Tasting rooms are much different than actually operating a bar, which then does bring in the other category of licensing, which is the brew pub, where you can brew and you can run a restaurant bar operation. So I think those have to be discussed, and depending on what you do there, the food trucks associated with them may or may not be an issue.
And we could distinguish it by how many acres, and you know,
Right.
because that equipment is so big, depending on, because I know the city of Albany was, or was it San Francisco? One of those big cities was the definition between micro, macro, and an even smaller version, like
Yeah.
experimental
Yeah.
brewery. So the amount, how how much equipment you have as well, too.
Right, how many barrels
Mhm.
per year your production capacity
Mhm.
and stuff, we can differentiate by that. The one other thing I'd just like to go back to, I said West Hartford allowed them in the industrial zone, and I just remembered there was a nuance to that. They didn't just say that you could have food trucks in industrial zones and open it up carte blanche. They actually said you could construct a food truck park in an industrial zone, because they had an individual who wanted to set up a location where they'd have capacity for up to, I think, 8 trucks. So that's what they allowed, an actual development of a food truck park on a parcel that could only take place in an industrial zone. So there's many ways to kind of look at this, and we can explore it as we go through.
Okay.
I just got a couple nits here.
Sure.
Acre, under definition, it says continuous. I think that should be contiguous. I mean, contiguous to me is 8 miles worth of 1 square foot parcels.
I really wanted to delete this. Well, in zoning, a lot of times there's the zoning acre, which is 40,000 square feet. We just round it. But an acre is pretty straightforward. If you turn to Webster's, you're gonna find 43,560. So I kind of felt like, is this really needed? But I was willing to let it stay, but I agree with you. It needs to go to contiguous, not contiguous.
Or go away, yeah.
Yeah.
And the other very minor issue is chicken coop says the rear yards. I mean, we've got one, which I think is delightful because little kids go by it every day. It's on a side yard. Do we really want to enforce it? I'd hate to think some resident could come forward and say, I want that chicken coop to go away because it's not in the backyard. The way the property is laid out, it's in a side yard.
Well, this gets to one of those things. I'm gonna mark this, that we have to look to it.
I mean, I'll bow to the professionals here. Maybe it's never come up.
No, understood, but.
Maybe ZBA.
Okay.
So this is the whole thing on that. There was a provision from the previous section that's being relocated into the residential sections that I think dealt with chicken coops from a regulatory standpoint. This is one of those areas where I'm gonna say that, this definition, a facility enclosed to house chickens, that's, in my mind, the end of the definition. And a rear yard of a residence is now a regulatory provision
Okay.
and doesn't really actually belong in this section. So I'm gonna note this, let us look at chicken coops where they're elsewhere addressed, and let's see if we can just get this provision out of the definition section at least, if it's handled elsewhere or
Okay.
handled elsewhere.
It's gotta be so many feet from the property line and all that too, anyway.
Yeah, we'll see what the main provision actually says for regulating them, and we'll just see if we can get this provision out of here, and so.
Okay.
Talk about drive-throughs. Page 5.
What about clothing bins?
What?
Those clothing bins? Those,
Oh.
Doug and I were talking about them today. There's one at Marissa's, where they just dump those clothing bins there. We
Yeah.
don't know who it is, and, they leave a mess over there, and the
Yeah.
property
Yeah,
doesn't
all
even
over.
know what they
Yeah.
are. So I don't know if that's a definition, or if that's a, I don't know, I've seen it.
Again, I think if the regs are silent, it shouldn't be there, but we can define it.
Yeah, what is
Do you think we have to define it? Or can we, if we just see it, we'll just?
You know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I know what
Because
you're
if
talking
it,
about.
because if it's, say at a church or something, and,
Right.
it's in an area that's not obstructing a parking space, I don't wanna have somebody
Your
complain
thoughts,
about
yes,
it,
Steve.
but.
I think they should be defined, and I think the regulations ought to spell out under what circumstances they're allowed. One of the things about clothing bins is the vast majority of them are not owned by not-for-profit organizations. They're
Right.
profit-making
Right.
businesses that sell the clothes.
Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of people dropping clothes off don't
Yeah.
think
Yeah, then
that's the case.
they leave a mattress there too, and then we gotta clean it up.
So it's most of them are for-profit businesses, they're taking up parking spaces, they're interfering with circulation in a previously approved plan. I think that ought to be regulated by the town.
So we can A, define them.
Okay.
We could B, restrict them if we wanted to, the charitable, that, you know, and we could probably use it in the section on outdoor merchandising or outdoor display, kind of regulatory provisions for locations and so forth, so. Let me just write myself a note.
Well, Goodwill, you drop stuff off and they sell it, so they're making a profit, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's just the
I
name.
mean, their
not-
building gets bigger and bigger, but you think with Goodwill that.
The name
but
implies-
it's for the owners.
But Goodwill may be a not-for-profit organization, I'm not
Yeah.
sure. I mean, they're
Yeah.
making a profit to fulfill their mission, and,
Right,
you know,
right.
but I think
Which
they
is-
may be a not-for-profit organization.
Which is
Yeah.
different than Don's clothing
Yeah.
company,
Understood.
that,
So Goodwill gives the money they make to,
right.
so.
I don't know if that's true, though.
I don't either.
Because I think their mission is carefully worded, where they say they help provide work to the less fortunate or something like that.
Well, they actually
And
do.
their mission is that they provide, you know, minimum wage jobs to people, but they keep the
They keep the
retained
profit.
earnings. Yeah.
That's the way I thought it was, yes.
That's usually the way.
Well, regardless, I think though that a lot of those boxes that are getting dropped off are not Salvation Army or Goodwill,
Right.
Agreed.
profit-making companies.
Yes, and they're paying rent, or they're paying something to be there.
Yeah.
I got 3 of them in front of my house, I know. I get 1,200 a month from them.
That'd be pretty good.
Yeah. We all have in front of our house.
Almost as good as a cell phone tower.
Yep, yeah.
So I highlighted drive-through in yellow as an editorial note to myself, and I can't remember why I did that now. I'm gonna have to go back to my notes and figure that out. One thing that's just running in the back of my mind is I don't think you actually have specific standards spelling out how to design and construct a drive-through.
No, it's only in our parking regulations.
Right.
Defining drive-through.
And that's one of those add-ons that when we get to the site development standards, chapter 6, that I think we're gonna recommend providing specific standards for
Good.
drive-throughs.
But I think that CVS, when they move to that other building,
Mhm.
they're gonna have a drive-through.
Two.
Like, two of them, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So what about the pharmacy up on Long Hill Green? They got a special permit or something to?
They got an approval when the building was constructed to allow for drive-through parking there. And that was the only one, I mean, drive-through.
Pharmacy.
Pharmacy, yeah. I think the only one before that was just McDonald's, when we left in town.
So you have a definition for driveway common, and it's a driveway serving one or more residential lot. When we get to site development standards, we're gonna be recommending a, put the words in my mouth, Steve.
Check my consolidated parcel.
Yeah, consolidated parcel provision and access management. And in that, it is the allowance of shared driveways for commercial businesses, so you cut down on curb cuts. So my thought here is we should probably change this definition to not restrict it to just residential if we end up going that way. So at this point, I'd like to just make an editorial note here to include commercial.
Could you just go back to the aquifer protection?
Sure.
We don't have a map. There's no map in the.
Do you have,
We don't have any aquifer, as far as I know.
so this, okay, we should check the state mapping of
I don't think we have any.
A and B.
Do you have any public drinking water supply wells in town?
We had wells, but they're not,
Yeah.
you know, there's one community well up off of Tashua, but there's no,
But no no water companies that get water from a
Pull up
well in town? Okay. Because for those water companies that have that condition, they were required to map all the aquifers. in that
I looked
state.
at the drinking water reservoir map from Aquarian, and they did not identify any aquifers on
Okay,
that.
all right,
But
We'll check.
the name of the map was not this.
got it, okay.
We'll check the state maps. If there aren't any, then these may be able to just go away. Silly having regulations or something you
50
don't
years ago,
have.
100 years ago, they probably had
All the
something.
drinking water supply wells, and they wouldn't have had to map the aquifers, and the state wouldn't have found.
Okay, let's look into that. So we'll take a look at that.
Generator? You did this one,
A what?
Generator?
Meaning for a house or a business or
Maybe
Both.
both.
the power supply thing. I just want to, we're
Yes,
not
yes.
talking like drip generation. I just want to be clear.
Economic generator.
How do you regulate those now for single-family homes?
Okay, we do essentially treat them as structures, so in a sense, they're supposed to be 50 from the front and rear and 20 from the sides. However, you really can't, you really, it's hard to do.
Okay.
And there's so many variables involved with it that I actually, years ago, came up with a guideline for generators, and to be placed at the rear where possible. And if they're never to be put in the front, placed on the side, if they have to go on the side, they have to be screened by vegetation. So that's an aesthetic as well as a noise canceling issue, not to be screened by a fence because that'll exacerbate the noise.
Can you provide that to us?
Absolutely, it's upstairs.
Because then we could use that for the basis of creating a generator as an accessory use provision. Do you differentiate between permanent and temporary? Like
We don't regulate temporary.
Temporary, so it's just if you're-
Permanently installed.
Okay.
And do you need a permit for that?
You need a
For the
full
permanent one.
building
Yeah.
permit,
Oh,
yeah,
good,
so
like temporary.
everybody signs off on it.
Okay.
What about for commercial and industrial generators? Do you have rules on maximum sound levels when they can exercise?
I
things
think
like
that's
that,
with
or-
the town ordinance.
That, again, that's regulated by the police department's
Yeah.
decibel. They have the responsibility of having the decibel meter on in their possession, and they will regulate.
So
that.
this.
The problem, that actually has not been that much of a problem, Steve, because the bigger ones, the industrial ones, are water cooled and they're very, very quiet. It's the air cooled ones that we would use at our houses that make the racket. Yeah.
Okay. So, but whatever those standards are that the police department enforces, they're the same standards that would apply to the manufacturing operation as well? Not a differentiation between
It's
making
just
a product
noise
and
generated,
just
no pun
noise.
intended,
Got
noise
it.
generated by machinery, and that's in the Muni code, which I'll be happy to get to you.
Okay.
Have you ever seen anything with the weekly startup of the generators where they limit it to a certain time? You know, during work, so if it's abutting a residential area, then,
Testing.
yeah. I'm like, are we getting to,
I don't think I've seen anything, so my feeling is maybe you're getting a little bit too in the weeds. Do you have a lot of these?
No, we have a ton of generators in town. What I will
Really?
say, Rob, is what's generally happened is, and I've had the conversations with people, a lot of people will run their generators when they know their neighbors are not gonna be around. You know, they'll test drive their
Yeah.
generators when they're not gonna be around, or, you know, they just kind of self-police, if you will.
oh, it's,
I've seen it done in the context of industrial uses. We did it in Avon on occasion, but only in site-specific, instances where the industrial use was not too far from a residential neighborhood,
Yeah.
and in the context of a special permit application that was being applied for. Maybe they were expanding the facility, or maybe they were coming in just to put the generator in.
yeah, I've only seen it as a condition of approval.
Condition of approval, right,
Nothing-
yeah.
Nothing set in stone, so.
So bottom line is, if you have a generator, make sure when you turn it on, when the power's going, that you have a long extension cord to your neighbor. Keep them happy. That's where most of the complaints come to ZBA.
I actually did that at my parents' house after that Halloween storm. I got their house wired for a generator, got them a generator, and because they weren't capable of getting it set up, I went to their neighbor and said, "Hey Tony, if there's ever a storm, come out and set up their generator, and it's got enough power where you can run an extension cord in your side window there." And he was like, "No problem, I'll take care of them." I was like, "Good."
I had 4 extension cords going. I had everybody over my house charging their phone and their computer.
I just gave my mother a candle. You're right.
I hope it was a drip cord.
There's something that we talked about in zoning last week, was road classifications.
Okay.
You know, arterial, collector road, there's no definition.
Yeah, they're only.
And I don't think that we should have a definition, we just refer to a map that we have in engineering, that we have a classification. of
It's
roads.
stated in our POCD.
Okay.
There's a map in there, but I think you have a more updated.
Yeah, we update it every year.
Map.
We
Mhm.
update every year.
So is there something where we could refer to the engineering department, or do we have to record a
Well,
map?
do you have any regulatory provisions that tie back to road classifications?
Well,
Well,
we're talking,
We have something
There.
proposed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh.
So they're making up the definitions, their own definitions, if we don't have one. Like
Yeah,
what
there-
is a
Yeah, there's some.
arterial road, and then using it, so.
I mean, I would say, one, you should really have a road classification system map within your POCD. If there's a more accurate one in your engineering department, or a better one that you more typically use at, I would recommend just a simple amendment motion,
Okay.
PZC, to cite it for the POCD. Just do a POCD amendment and cite to the one referenced by them.
Okay. Is there any way we could figure out what the existing one is missing? You guys may have the overlay. Or I could
We'll
probably
take
get
a-
you-
we'll take a look.
Yeah.
I do that through your POCD, not through the zoning
Okay.
regs. So,
That's fine.
any other definitions?
I don't like the definition of building height.
You don't like it?
I don't like it. I think it's vague. The greatest vertical distance between the level of the first floor sill. So if you have a basement that's 3/4 of the way out of the ground, you don't count that height. I think you need,
Most towns have at this point, have a much more advanced definition
yeah.
of building height, and partly it's because of the size of homes that have been built in some towns, and it gets into average grade,
Grades around the
grade
foundation.
plane.
Mhm.
10 feet away, they take average points, it gets a little more complicated.
I have a full definition with diagrams showing how it's measured.
Yes.
If you guys wanted to replace and add that.
Yeah,
I
because
think-
building height is always a question.
And
I've seen.
often it's to the middle of the roof, because you've got different heights of roofs, and here we're going
Yeah.
to the highest point of the building. And I've seen a couple times where it kind of, it really worked to our detriment of not only the homeowner, but the town, I thought, by strictly pointing out the highest point of the building, so.
Would that be the chimney?
No.
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 Chimneys are excluded.
Usually it relates to the roof. Usually they go from the eave line to the ridge line, take a midpoint, as where they're trying to bring it to, but as Bill said, also where you start
That's the key, yeah.
is also.
Is it usually from the road, right? Don't they take the average from
No,
the?
usually it's I've seen a lot of towns do it right at the foundation, where you take the average grade all, so many
Right.
points around, or 10 feet outside of it.
Right.
But, and it's usually from existing grade too.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't create the
You can't
grade.
create-
That's why it's there, because, yeah, they want you to go out a
So,
certain distance.
and this definition doesn't address any of that.
Okay,
Another option is to throw it out there, which simplifies the way of calculating. I agree that we can come up with a much more comprehensive, but a much more complex way of calculating. But another thought would be to just take the lowest elevation to the highest point of the roof. Again, in some towns, the greatest concern really is about fire protection. How big is the ladder in the truck? How can I access the building? The other reason for regulating it, though, has to do with the appearance, right? The architecture of the building, which is, I guess, where you're heading, and what it looks like and how it relates to other structures in the neighborhood. But from a fire safety perspective, that simplified version really, it's easy to calculate, and it really gets to that point. What's the highest point of that structure relative to the lowest elevation around the structure? Because otherwise, it gets really tricky to try and figure out.
Yeah, that's why I'm like,
how you
we're
measure
gonna need a
that.
diagram for this,
Yep.
I think, no matter what we do, to kind of.
yep. Why don't we provide you some options?
That would be good, because, you know, in some towns, it's so complicated, you have to then go and hire an engineer or a surveyor, somebody to figure the whole thing out.
Right, right.
Just for a little addition, we're in trouble, you know?
Right.
In a town like Trumbull.
And he's both.
We'll provide you some options, and, great.
One of the, on the definition of building area and building coverage, you go by drip line here, which means it goes from the edge of the roof at the drip line, but all the rest of your definitions all go by building area. It seems to be, it seems that you could simplify it by taking off the drip line and just going from the face of the building, and then, you can limit your eave size by, no more than 2 feet or.
Or each size is limited to 24 inches.
Right. It just, your building coverage, it becomes a little convoluted here when it fits in with everything else and area-wise. You know what I mean?
So can you just delete i.e. drip lines?
Yeah.
Okay.
But for, say, a commercial structure that had a covered walkway in the front, that would be far in excess of 24 inches, so that would count as.
As
impervious,
coverage.
right, as coverage.
But on a residential home where you have an 8-inch overhang,
Right.
you need to measure to the outside of all that to get all those dimensions, and
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
it's a moot point.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Other building definitions? Might be on a roll here.
Floodplain is one word.
Takes a while to scroll. It's not a floodplain?
Floodplain is one word.
We got it.
Um,
See, those are the changes I love.
So your floor area gross, and I don't see any floor area having a height of more than 12 feet shall be deemed as 2 floors. Is that really necessary?
Probably not, but someone felt it was.
Yeah, I don't know why, because that came back to haunt us, and is that a variance from the fire department? They need another variance for that.
Any floor having a height of more than 12 feet shall be deemed a 2 floors.
So if
Yeah,
you have
what
more
do-
than 13, you have a family
Yeah, what do
room,
we care
2-story
about the
family
height
room,
if it's-
they're gonna count that as 2 floors.
Yeah, what do we care about the height if the building's gonna be a certain height?
Right, the
Let them-
building's regulated
Let
by
them,
That's a
give those, yeah.
good call on that.
What about, well, then what if an accessory building garage, you start getting 12 feet?
Well, we'll get it.
Well, but I'm saying, if you got
Maybe you're talking about
No, that's.
floor area,
This
floor,
this is the building height, where the
gross
gross floor area.
So you want that last sentence deleted?
Yeah.
Is that what we're essentially doing?
We skipped
This
over.
is an area where diagrams can be very helpful, and the don't remember what we have in here, because it can get very complicated for the layperson sometimes. When you start getting into attics and
Yeah,
things
in
like
one,
that,
in one
what's
spot,
considered a story and when it isn't considered a story, and so forth and so on.
in one spot here, I noticed that there was, they referenced headroom of 7 feet, then someplace else it says 6 feet. They just seem to be inconsistent. I don't know if I highlighted
Probably under attic.
that.
See,
Yeah, sure.
there's a reason for that, because you don't want.
I don't think there's anything. I don't think there's anything.
I'll have to find it again, I know, but I did read that, you know, in the front they reference, right here, it's a story and a half. It has floor area, ceiling height of 6 feet or more or greater over an area greater than 50% of the floor area of the story below, see floor area gross. But if you go to gross floor area, it talks about 7-foot heights. I just don't know.
So one question would be, for a single-family home, would it make more sense to just regulate on the basis of how tall the structure is, as opposed to having to figure out or argue about whether or not something's a half-story or a full story?
Yeah, I'm kind of feeling here like this gross floor area definition is way more complicated, since the next definition is livable floor area. If you're already defining the livable floor area, then gross is just total floor area regardless of stories and
Yeah,
half
just lot
stories
coverage.
and, yeah.
I'm not even.
Is the purpose here to avoid people being able to game the floor area ratio? Meaning, I could build a house that's much bigger on a lot than I should by simply just jacking up the ceiling. I don't know enough about that ratio, but
The floor area ratio would keep you from doing that, because that would take your total floor area by the lot size.
yeah.
But, I mean,
So what-
this excludes basements and cellars, so if you finish your basement, does that not count as floor area?
Yeah, what's, do we really need livable? Because the gross floor area is
I don't
covering
think this
everything.
actually comes into where the tax assessor looks at it, because they don't tax anything that's below grade.
Unless it's
That could
finished.
be, that could be where this comes in.
Unless
Because
it's
even if it's
finished, though,
finished,
right?
they still don't tax.
They
Part of it's finished, they do.
Finished,
I think they do.
Yeah, they do. If it's got a ceiling, I think they.
So where are you using an FAR?
The FAR is in the floor area ratio, which,
No, I get that. The next definition down is floor area ratio.
But
Where are
when
you
do
using
we-
it regulatorily? Is it dictating building coverage or
Yeah,
density
I
and?
think we were going with FR for what, for in-laws?
Yeah, it's,
Yes.
yeah, it's gross living space.
Yeah, but was that the only area?
what, in your,
I think the intent of this was to get rid of the McMansion. That's would be my guess. And I'm, you know, trying to just figure out where a lot of this
What
stuff.
do you mean by get rid of
Yeah,
the?
They just didn't want these big, it's happened quite a bit in other local areas, towns around here, vis-a-vis Fairfield, where they've taken quarter acre lots and put $4,000 square foot homes on them.
Okay.
And so you have nothing there, so all the ratios are way out of whack on something like that.
Right.
I think that's maybe what.
So it's trying to deal with tear downs. Okay. This just seems extremely complicated.
So why don't we see,
It is.
why don't you see if we can lessen that complication?
Yeah, let us look at those three definitions, the gross, the livable, and then the floor area ratio, and how that plays out in the regs. Let's see if we can come up with something simpler here.
There's a reference to see Article 3 bulk, floor livable area. Livable. Yeah. I don't know.
It's just, yeah.
No, it's just, that's referencing where that.
They're right, it's really bad. To try to explain it to somebody, it's just leaving it so more.
I totally agree with you on, the use of diagrams, and anywhere you want a diagram, we can create a diagram for you, but just the thought of creating a diagram to try and explain that was
Yeah,
overwhelming.
normally, how they deal with it is in whether something is a story, because you can already put in 2.5 stories or, in your maximum heights. And then so by regulating what constitutes a story, it starts to help to cut down on the area, the sizes of a house or the area, because something can very easily become a 3-story building when it's not allowed. If you have too much area up there, because people are using attics to try to get, more space. Is one thing.
And you appear to have decent story and half-story regulations, other than a C floor area gross reference. Let's take a look at that. This might be overthought.
All right, if we're done with that, I'd like to go back to definition of family.
Yeah, I have a highlight there, don't I?
That's a problem.
Yeah. It's a law problem. So these were my thoughts here. One is, so the first half, one or more individuals related by blood, marriage, civil union, living together as a single housekeeping unit. That's fine. It's the second part, plus up to 2 persons. That number makes me queasy. That only 2 unrelated persons. There's kind of an unreasonableness to that, and I think there's been case law in other states that have been clear on that you can't really limit the number. But then it just says not so related. The key phrase for me in all of this is living together as a single housekeeping unit. Staying away from this other stuff that starts getting in the court's eyes as kind of messy, ugly, maybe meaning other things. I was involved in a case with a community that intentionally adopted a blood relationship provision to keep out certain individuals and renters from their community, and the courts did not take kindly to it.
There's something here that doesn't make sense. You have a family living together as a single housekeeping unit,
But not
plus up to 2 persons, not so related,
right.
living together as a single housekeeping unit. I don't understand that.
Right.
Because he put, you don't have it in black, he put this in there.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
after that.
Yeah.
Not as this.
Oh, okay.
So it's redundant.
Oh. Okay,
Right.
okay, I'm sorry, yeah.
That's okay.
So,
My printer didn't print it.
so my general feeling here, the way this should read, one or more individuals related by blood, marriage, civil union, adoption, foster child status, or one or more unrelated persons living together as a housekeeping unit. So families can either be related or unrelated, provided they are living together as a single
As a single.
housekeeping unit.
Okay.
So is it
So-
2 or more? I'm
So,
sorry.
all right, so you have worn my hat before.
Yep.
We have a number of colleges around us,
Yep.
and we have a number of people who are more than willing to rent out to as many college folks as they can
Yep.
to generate, to maximize the return on that structure, right?
Yep.
Creates an enormous problem for me,
Okay.
an enormous problem, and I can't say that enough.
Okay.
I probably deal with this 20 times a year, maybe 25 times a year, and it always hits right around the beginning of college. And
Yep.
it's always at the height of the summer when people are moving in.
Yep.
And the complainants have a valid issue. They come in, the kids do what we all did when we were in college, right? They party, maybe they study, but they party a lot on the weekends, they bring their friends over, they have loud music and the boisterous and the beer cans over it.
Yep.
And I get fun of that.
Okay.
So we need to look at this, and I can appreciate your, talking about maybe some legal problems here, but I'd love to talk to Vin about how we can get this corrected. because from my standpoint, we need to strengthen this, not let it be more lax.
Yeah, and one, the law's not in your favor.
That's why I said to you, so be it, but I
Right.
think we need to talk to Mr. Moreno about that.
Okay.
So so these people are parking their cars in the driveway that are not registered in the town of Trumbull. They're from out of state, these cars. I mean, that's how you can tell, kinda.
Well, the tax assessor can and does go after those things where he sees it, you know. If I alert him to that fact, he'll go after the people and try to get them for the, you know, for the taxes on the car. But that really doesn't address the big picture, not to say that there's any.
No, yeah, but like you and I talked about on my street, that house that has 8, 9 people living there plus the family. And I said, how can they get away with that? They don't have a kitchen downstairs. So all those people are living in that house.
I've dealt with this many times. There's not good examples.
I think if you look at the area communities,
The
same problem, Bridgeport and Fairfield has the
The
same
college
problem.
rental nightmare.
It is, I know, and I know Hammond just went through it with Quinnipiac. I'm not sure that there was a lawsuit there, I'm not sure what the outcome was. of that.
They developed specific regulations to allow like a parking lot in the back of a residential, behind the house, so you don't get all the college kids parking in the
Street,
front.
yeah.
They had a lot of crazy requirements that I know that one stuck out for me, but
Right.
I don't know
Well,
where it is right now.
I mean, let us look at this and let us see what we can come up with you. We have this really tough issue of federal Supreme Court cases and state Supreme Court cases related to families and what constitutes a family, which makes it very tough on how you regulate that stuff. Some of the stuff you can do, you know, we could maybe come up with provisions to deal with the parking, to deal with some of those other things. I'm not totally sure yet. All I know is every single college town in America has these same struggles.
That's what I was gonna ask, what's Fairfield do? You ever look at their regs? How's Fairfield?
They allow it, Bridgeport allows it.
Well, I know they're forced to allow it, but I'm assuming they must have tried to.
But I will tell you that.
It's
Because Fairfield had
not
the
good.
biggest
It's
problem
not-
out there at the water.
It's not good, and what will happen here, you guys don't all need to hear this, but it will be, really, you can't do anything about this, I'll call the first selectman's office.
Right,
And that
understood.
happens all the time.
Yeah.
I'll just call the first selectman's office.
So let us take a look at this and see what we can do. As written, this definition is problematic. So
Can we base the number on the building code for the amount of square footage of livable space per individual?
it's possible.
You could even,
I mean-
you could do it on the number of bedrooms and then how the septic system can handle it if it's not sewered and all that sort of thing, but, you know, so then it's a
Right.
4-bedroom colony, those have
So-
kids in there plus 2 of their friends. You know?
So that, I mean, I think that's one of the ways to look at this, you know, public health code and septics, you know, building code and persons per room or per square footage occupancy numbers. Maybe we can tie into this to, at the very least, limit the numbers of individuals, but this direct kind of like, you can only have 2 unrelated persons as a family gets into
Yeah, I think
legal
putting
issues.
it
Best we can figure, it probably came out, the idea back then was probably coming up with au pairs or something, or help or something, live in help or, you know, senior aids or something.
So,
Yeah, I think putting a number on it is getting dangerous.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
And so I think if we could work off of an existing ordinance or another code.
Yeah.
We could also maybe better define what we mean by living together as a single housekeeping unit. That's not gonna solve your problem,
Yeah.
but it means more than just chipping in for the rent together. You know, it means conducting your daily activities in the way that a family
Right.
would.
And
Grocery shopping together.
and that could
together.
include things like, it's possible, I'm not sure yet, but it could, single housekeeping unit, we could define and we could add language to it, like, you know, names of all individuals living together as a single housekeeping unit need to be on the lease. So then, if it's one person and then they're subletting rooms to friends or whatever, ways to put constraints here where they have to be able to demonstrate that they truly are a single housekeeping unit, and for college kids it may become problematic. So,
They do that in Fairfield, they all have to be on the lease.
Yeah.
So that's how they
So-
feel, and even New York has the same thing, so everybody's
So-
on the lease.
we'll explore options here and let's talk more about it. But just we're walking this
Yeah, I get it.
line.
I get it.
So.
I know Hamden has to, you have to put the houses, you have to sign up for a registry, right, of the houses that
Yeah,
students are living in?
and that then becomes
This is more work.
So communities do require. There are some communities that have done these rental registry requirements. At the very least, they require the owner to have a valid operating phone number and so forth, so that they're easily contactable. You're not chasing after an LLC and so forth. If that's part of the solution or the solution going to the registry, then I think we have to talk to the town attorney about doing that through ordinance, not through zoning. So we're kind of also once again walking this fine line. Is this an ordinance issue? Is it a zoning issue? But
I don't belabor it, that's, I think, what
Yeah.
we've been, we'll talk to them.
yeah, let's discuss this and figure out what to do with it. So.